So, I've been speaking on this issue for about 20 years now. And whenever I do speak, and I've been all over the world, one of the first questions I get is, how did somebody from the Federal Reserve get involved in early childhood education? It's hard to think about business cycles and interest rates and inflation and trade and banking issues and early childhood education. So I'll give you that backstory. It was all very serendipity. It wasn't planned, let me say that. I was at a breakfast in Minneapolis about 20 some years ago, and there was a nonprofit organization that was founded by a former governor of the state of Minnesota, Al Quie, and a former mayor of Minneapolis, Don Fraser. And they were presenting the case at this lunch or this breakfast. They were presenting this case that we should fund more public funding for early childhood education. And they were basically making a moral argument that this is the right thing to do. And I made the mistake of raising my hand and saying, I don't disagree that it's a moral argument, but I think you got to go beyond moral arguments if you want to get public funding. Policymakers have limited number of dollars to spend on policy issues, and they've got to rank them. They've got to decide what is the best investment. So I suggested to the governor and to the mayor that they do an economic analysis to see if there is a pretty good economic return. I thought there might be, although I wasn't sure. And that was my mistake because they agreed with me and they said, okay, how would you like to come on the board of our nonprofit and do the research? Well, it was hard to say no to a former governor and a former mayor, and my directors at the bank said, okay, Art, as long as it's not going to take much time, and I didn't think it would, they said, go ahead. So I recruited a young colleague of mine at the bank who was our education outreach person, Rob Grunwald, and I told him I committed us to do the research, but I said it shouldn't be a problem. I know at least one longitudinal study that we can look at and take an economic lens to it and see if we can make the case. This study, there's actually three or four of these studies, but the one that I knew about, is fairly famous in the United States, the Perry Preschool study. And this was a study that was started in the early 60s in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And somebody had the bright idea that maybe kindergarten is too late for our most at-risk children because most of our at-risk children are starting way behind in school. And when they start way behind in school, they generally don't succeed in school. And when they don't succeed in school, there are a lot of negative implications of that as children and as adults. So the Perry Preschool was going to take a look, do a study. They actually had 123 poverty poverty families. They randomly divided into two groups, and one group gets a high quality early childhood experience, and the other is a control group. This was for 3 and 4 year olds, and we had data. We originally had data about 30 years worth of data on these children, and now as adults. And what we found was that the kids who were in the quality program, which included master level teachers, a lot of home visiting, working with the parents, they found that the kids that were in the program, compared to the kids that weren't, compared to the control groups, were much less likely to need special ed when they got into K through 12, were much less likely to be retained in a grade, were much more likely to be literate by the sixth grade, graduate high school, get a job, pay taxes, stay off welfare. Crime rate went down 50%. Well, I looked at that and I said, those are, that's a great outcome. But we asked a simple question that most economists and business people would ask, what was the return on that investment? Um, I told Rob there's a formula in which with this data, we can put dollar values on all these benefits and we can back out what's the annual rate of return on that investment. Now, I told Rob if we could get roughly 6% rate of return or better than 6%, we can go back to the governor and to the mayor and say, we do have an economic argument. 6% is roughly the annual rate of return on the stock market post-World War II. So if we can beat the market, I can go into the political system and say, we have a good investment for you. So I was looking for about 8%. We actually got double-digit inflation adjusted returns out of that investment. We got, for every dollar invested, we could get you $8 back. Now, there are some additional studies that have found various rates of return. It's not a precise science, but it's overwhelming evidence that there's a very strong, high rate of return on investing in our most vulnerable kids starting in pre-K, 3 and 4. I was speaking on this issue in Boston a number of years ago, and a fellow came up to me and said, Rolnick, um, uh, like your study, I know you're looking at 3 and 4 year olds, but for the most at-risk kids, you're starting too late. I didn't know what he was saying. I didn't understand it. His name was Jack Shunkoff. He's at Harvard. He brought me to Harvard, basically mentored me on the neuroscience of brain development and how critical the earliest years are for brain development. And that if a child is in a stressful environment in those early years, that brain doesn't develop properly. Um, so he convinced me when Rob and I decided to write a second essay on how do we bring research to reality, we better start early. So let me just talk about briefly how we brought research to reality and how we got into the public space. We took a very simple idea. We knew from the research that empowering the parent's critical in the development of that child, and we have to start early. Early is prenatal. We empower the parent. We call it the Minnesota model in 2 ways. We provide a scholarship so that parent can send their child to a high quality program of their choice. And we start with a parent mentor. Every scholarship parent mentor is tied in with the scholarship. And that parent mentor starts with the family when we can, as early as prenatal. So that's the Minnesota model. Fortunately, we were able to establish a nonprofit with the business community, and we funded a pilot. And the pilot was in a low-income area in St. Paul. We gave out about 600 scholarship mentor, the Minnesota model, in this community. And the question was, could we actually administer this? Could we actually take it into a community and make it work? And we did. People were concerned that there weren't enough quality programs in that community. When the market found that our kids had scholarships paying up to $12,000 a year, and that was roughly the annual cost of the Perry preschool program. When the market learned that, many new programs opened up, and within 6 months, every one of our parents who got a scholarship could find a high quality pre-K program within their community. And we brought in an outside evaluator. We were getting very strong results. Most of our kids were starting school ready. Our parents were very engaged. That program got us national attention. Eventually, the federal government under President Obama gave us a significant amount, something like $50 million, to replicate the pilot around the state of Minnesota. And that's what we're doing to this day. We're continuing that. We've gotten considerable amount of additional resources because of the results. So today, when I talk about these issues, it's not just research. We have in some of the most difficult communities, the highest poverty communities in Minnesota, we're getting the following kind of results. This is a nonprofit that's working with scholarship kids and parent mentors, and they serve about 600 families, and we're finding that our kids are born full weight, full term, not addicted. Our teenage moms aren't getting pregnant again. 90% of our children start school ready. Historically, out of this community, it's like 30%. And most of our kids are reading by third grade. And that is, they're reading at national levels. So what we're finding is, I actually think the return we found in this original study, we underestimated the returns because we're finding huge health benefits. In fact, the Nobel laureate James Heckman was able to get data on the adults in the Perry preschool program and data on the children of the children. And we're finding that the adults are healthier than in the control group, that the children of the children are going are succeeding in school, and many are going on to additional college and other programs. So we've argued, bottom line, we don't think there's a better public investment we can make in the economy. I'm not saying it's not a moral argument, it absolutely is a moral argument, but it's also an economic argument. This is our future workforce. If these kids can succeed, our community will succeed. So I turned over the years. I've started out as a researcher, and I have to admit, I've become a strong advocate for these investments. And fortunately, the national attention we have gotten and international attention we have gotten a significant amount, especially in the United States, they're now going into high quality, it's got to be high quality, early childhood education and development targeted to our most at-risk children. If you have additional funding, you can provide partial scholarships to low-income families, middle-income families, but the key return, the best return by far, is targeting at our most at-risk children. So that was my bottom line. That's how I got started. That's why I've been, involved in this space for 20 years. And when people ask, well, what does this have to do with the Federal Reserve? I say, well, there's a real strong economic argument. The Federal Reserve is charged with promoting the U.S. economy. And by investing in human capital, as I know Aaron has discussed, as investing in early childhood education in particular, this is one of the best investments we can make, and the Federal Reserve absolutely should be in this space, promoting this kind of research, continuing this kind of research, because there's always more to learn, and making sure that as many of our kids born into poverty have the same opportunity as all other kids succeeding in school. So thank you for the opportunity for presenting these results. I obviously feel pretty strongly about it, and I'm thrilled that you got Aaron out there to provide some of his research.
So Art, one question that people have been asking me all day, and I wanted to ask you, and my partner here, we decided to ask you. You've been extremely successful at getting policymakers to change and to make new investments. In Minnesota, hundreds of millions of dollars of new investment, over the course of a few years, for home visiting, for early care, for other services for families. Can you speak for a few minutes about, 5 minutes, about how to be successful at that, or what are some of the barriers that you've run into?
Yeah. Aaron, that's a very relevant question for me today, because I'm trying to replicate the success we've had in Minnesota in particular. And as you mentioned, we've gotten hundreds of millions for these programs. And I'm trying to have the same impact here in Arizona, where I spend the winter. Nice place to be. And I get that question asked a lot. How did you succeed? Why were you so successful in Minnesota, and how can we replicate that success in Arizona? So let me just say, I wish I had planned this. I wish I could claim I planned it. It was all a bit serendipity. I was asked to speak at an annual meeting of the Twin Cities United Way. United Way is a major nonprofit organization that is all funding community and various projects to promote economic health and economics in a community. And the board of directors happened to be, their board consisted of a number of the top CEOs in our community, in particular the CEO of Cargill, the CEO of Best Buy, the CEO of Target, the CEO of United Health, the CEO of things, just let me say another health organizations. And the CEOs, they got this idea, they understood the research, they recognize how important the quality of the workforce is to an economy. And fortunately, CEOs have a longer term, much longer term horizon, if you will, than most politicians have. And they got behind this research. They're the ones who decided to do a pilot. They raised $20 million to do the pilot. on their own. We didn't accept any public money initially. In fact, we never accepted public money for the pilot. And it was because of the business community, and especially the very strong business community who's very community minded in Minnesota, that made this happen. I don't think without their voices, I don't think we would have had the success. The research was important, but having the business community behind these ideas, I think, is what made uh, why we were so successful in the policy arena. Now, let me just say, in Arizona here, I am working now, speaking one-on-one with a number of business leaders. We're planning in the fall to have a major event going through the research and the importance of investing in these kids and the success we're having in other parts of the country. That is the way I think that you can have some success in the public policy arena. That is, in particular, in getting the funding. This is all about funding now. We know the science is clear. In fact, it's interesting. We have two independent sciences here: the economics and the neuroscience, both coming to the same conclusion that we're way under investing in high quality early education for these kids. And I have very little trouble selling these ideas, explaining these ideas to the business community. They're the ones that have quite a bit of political capital, if you will, in with politicians. So if you get the business community saying, "Listen, this is the future workforce. We better invest in these kids if we want to have a strong economy," that can make a huge difference. It did in Minnesota. It has in a number of other states that I wasn't involved with, but here in Arizona, I'm trying to replicate that. So my um, prescription, if you will, for bringing this to fruition, and fruition means we do this for every child born into poverty, is get the business community on your page. Get the business community, educate them, make sure they understand why this is so important. Then I think you have a chance of replicating the success we've had in Minnesota.
Thank you, Art. Professor, yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, this is Sergio Pecorelli speaking, and I am one of the teachers, let's say, of this master course. I wanted to thank you particularly, for not only inspiring us and sharing what you have been doing, which is extremely successful. I think it's unique. But I think that we could invite you here to Italy and speak with our politicians. Because I think that the take-home message from you is not only, of course, the achievements that you have shown us, but also, what we should be doing and we should be trying. We have been extremely unsuccessful up to now. Overall, there are only, as usual, a few fortunate cases, but successful cases. But usually, it's very, very hard to convince not only politicians but also investors how important all of this is. And out of a joke, I always say that probably politicians didn't have good 1,000 days of life at the beginning of their life, but this is, of course, a joke. But obviously, we really wanted to thank you for your presence here. We are really sorry that you couldn't come to Italy, but we hope to meet you here in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me just say that it would be quite an opportunity to speak to the politicians on this issue. I think that if you make it clear it's in their interest, it's in the community's interest, not to invest is very expensive. People say, "Oh, it's expensive to provide this program." I say, not really. If you look at it as an investment, it's a huge return. It's very expensive not to invest. Um, and politicians get that. Again, if you invite me to speak to the politicians, also invite the business leaders. I think that would help a lot, and I'm definitely open to such an invitation. I was glad that that Aaron was able to present his research at your conference. But I do have experience. I've testified in Washington and in a number of states around the country, and I would definitely consider such an invitation. But thank you for your kind words.